So welcome today. If you're watching us online, we welcome you also. Reminder, we have a couple of services if you want to join us anytime, 9 o'clock and this service at 10:30. So we are following the children's department. We're working together with them, going through the whole Bible. They have a curriculum called the Gospel Project, and it connects everything to Jesus. Last week we entered the wisdom literature portion of the scriptures, and wisdom literature, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. So last week we were in Ecclesiastes. Today we're going to talk about Job. And so Job is a long book, pretty long, 42 chapters, and written in the days of the Old Testament patriarchs. We're not exactly sure when or who wrote it, but we're going to kind of do an overview. So there is a word that we can all relate to. There are several words that we can relate to that have emotions. When we talk about love or hate or being happy or being sad, we all have those emotions. But another word that is universal is the word suffering. Suffering. We don't like to talk about suffering, but there are times in our lives or the lives of perhaps someone that we love, someone close to us, and we have to endure suffering. It's an age-old problem. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, really. They had their children and murder within their family. Genesis chapter 4, Cain kills his brother Abel. So suffering has been with us from almost the very, very beginning. Job is well known for his suffering. You know, that's the one thing people that don't even know much of the Bible, they probably recognize Job as that man who suffered terribly in life. So the story is pretty long, 42 chapters, but I'm going to read you the condensed version so we can kind of get a broad picture, and then we're going to look at some principles and things we can learn from the story. So here's the shortened version. By the way, it's exactly what the kids are hearing today. So if you have kids in the children's department, this is the story that they're going to hear. Job was a wealthy man who loved God and wanted to follow God's plan. One day, Satan came before God. God asked Satan if he had noticed Job. No one else on earth is like him, God said. Job was an honest man. He feared God and turned away from evil. Job only follows you because you protect him and you blessed him, said Satan. If you take away everything Job has, he will not follow you anymore. So God gave Satan permission to take away everything Job had, but Satan was not allowed to hurt Job. Satan sent men to steal Job's animals. He caused Job's children to die. In one day, Job lost all of his wealth and his children, but Job continued to follow God. Satan came to God again. He said, if Job gets sick, he will not praise you anymore. So God gave Satan permission to make Job sick, but God did not let Satan kill Job. Job became ill with sores all over his skin. Do you still have faith in God? Job's wife asked. Curse God and die. But Job said, that's foolish. How can we accept good things from God and not trouble? 3 of Job's friends came to visit Job. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Job's friends did not comfort Job. They said, Job, you must obey God. If you do what is right and stop sinning, God will give you back everything you've lost. I haven't done anything wrong, Job said. Job wished he had someone to talk to God for him. He wanted answers because he did not understand why he was suffering. Finally, a man named Elihu came to speak to Job. God is greater than man, Elihu explained. He is not silent. God always does what is right. Then God spoke to Job through a whirlwind. God asked Job, were you there when I made the earth? Are you the one who told the sea where to stop? Did you decide when the sun would rise or when snow would fall? Did you put the stars in the sky? Can you tell the eagles when to fly in the sky? God helped Job understand that God is all-powerful, sovereign, and good. Job could not completely understand God's plans, but he could trust God. God is in control. Job was sorry for doubting God. God gave back to Job everything he had lost and much more. Job had 10 more children, and he lived 140 more years. Job got to see his grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow up before he died. So that's the story of Job. Now this morning, my goal is to glean some practical advice from the book of Job, advice that will help us deal effectively with the problem of suffering. And so I'm not going to attempt to share some kind of theological treatise with you about the relationship between sin and suffering and the sovereignty of God. I'm not going to delve into that. But I do want to share with you 4 helpful lessons on life from the book of Job. 4 things that I hope will help us deal with this issue. The first lesson is this, that bad things can, and they often do, happen to good people. And I think this is helpful for us to know, even though we don't like to hear about this, but nevertheless, it's true. Bad things do happen to good people. In Job chapter 1, verse 1, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job, and it says, this man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Job was a very good man, and his suffering had nothing to do with a moral failure or some sort of spiritual deficiency on his part. His spiritual character is described in detail with 4 words, and you put all these together, and it's very descriptive. He was blameless and upright and feared God and resisted evil. Now, blameless doesn't mean that he was sinless, but it does mean, however, that he was a man of integrity. He was true to his word. And upright means that he didn't deviate from God's standards. He was faithful. He measured up. And fearing God means that he was devoted to God in his religion. He was very devoted, very sincere. He even offered sacrifices for each of his children in case maybe they had sinned. He was that devoted, and he shunned evil. In other words, he stayed away from anything that might be questionable in terms of morality. So he was an exceptionally good man. He was as good a man probably as there ever has been. He had a close relationship with God. And even though God allowed Satan to test Job and God allowed tragedy to visit Job, God was not the source of Job's suffering. And Job was not suffering because he deserved it in some sense of the word. God was not punishing Job. And the truth is that the curse of sin has contaminated and corrupted and compromised every aspect of creation. There is suffering, there is brokenness and things in the world today because sin has entered the world. And not only that, when you combine that brokenness with our own free will, that God allows us to make our own decisions, when you combine those elements of brokenness and freedom, you have a recipe for a lot of problems, a lot of pain in life. And so bad things do happen to good people. Sometimes innocent people experience terrible tragedy and crime against them. Job and Job's friends, rather, they insisted, and it's sad that they did, but they insisted that he was suffering because God was punishing him. You've done something terrible, Job. Just confess it. You've done something bad. That's why you're suffering. And a lot of people sometimes think that God's punishing me or God's punishing you because you deserve it. You've done something, and now you're being punished. Jesus' disciples thought that even. They saw a man born blind, and in John chapter 9, verse 2, they asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? But Jesus answered, neither one. He's not being punished. He's not being blinded, made blind because somebody sinned. The bottom line is when sin entered the world, and we read about it in Genesis chapter 3, when sin entered the world, everything was corrupted. Every aspect of creation broken by sin. Man's relationship with God, it's broken. Man's relationship with himself, it's broken, right? Adam's ashamed and afraid, and he's hiding from God. His relationship with his wife, in other words, our relationships with one another, broken with sin in the world. And our relationship even to creation, it's broken because of sin. And we have things like, poison ivy and cancer and all kinds of various frustrations, all the allergens out there in the air and things, because creation is broken, it's fractured, and those consequences are far, far reaching. So we do learn this lesson, and it's not a pleasant one, but it's true. Bad things do sometimes happen to good people. Sometimes the innocent, unfortunately, suffer. Here's another lesson we learn in the book of Job. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. We're introduced to Job's three friends near the end of chapter 2. I want to read just a few verses, verse 11 and following. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, which, by the way, is the shortest man in the Bible, the Shuhite, not very tall. Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamite, it takes a while for that one to soak in. When they heard about all the troubles that had come upon Job, they set out from their homes, and they met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep out loud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. And then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. You have to give these three guys a lot of credit for traveling to be with Job and for their empathy and their initial reaction to Job's misery. They come and they're so moved that without saying a word, they're just weeping. Job is such a pitiful sight. And they sit down and they throw dust on their heads and they tear their clothes, and they're just with Job physically as he is suffering. And they are hurting with him and for him. Now, if we had stopped right there, they were doing a great job just being with him. They're comforting Job in their presence. And in fact, it's biblical. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And many times when tragedy strikes and we think about comforting someone, we don't even need to say anything. Just be present. Just be there and let them know that you care. Weep with them or share their pain. But what happens next, they just took all that good they did and they just kind of threw that away, because what happens next is they begin to talk. And as they begin talking, they are sharing their thoughts that probably they talked as they journeyed to be with Job. They were probably already talking about, what was going on. And so as they begin to talk, they're digging a hole, and it just keeps getting deeper, because they basically say, Job, you've done some terrible sin. That's why God is punishing you. And just confess it. Just admit how bad you are, or admit this wrong thing you've done, and then God can heal you. And they insist on playing this guilt card with Job, and they don't relent. In fact, there are 3 cycles of their speeches, and they just keep turning up the heat and putting on the pressure. And the more they do, the more difficult it becomes. Finally, in chapter 16, Job says, you're miserable comforters, all of you. You're miserable comforters. And he said, I also could speak like you if you were in my place. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you. And it's always, easier when we are not in the situation, right? When we're not the ones in the hot seat, when we're not the ones struggling, it's always easy to tell people what they need to do. If you just did this, it'd fix all your problems. But it's a different story, isn't it, when we're the ones who are struggling? And there's a lot of wisdom and just knowing when to be silent, keep our words at a minimum. Proverbs 17, verse 27, 28, I like this couple of verses. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. Just nod a lot and say, that's interesting, and your friends will think you're amazing, right? Yeah, I hear that. James 1:19 says, dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So we learn lessons from Job's story. Bad things happen to good people. Things happen, sometimes tragedy strikes, and it comes upon people who don't deserve it. They're innocent. And also, we would do well to watch what we say. Sometimes, there are no adequate answers, right? There really is nothing to say. Just be present. Just share and show love to those who are hurting. Here's another lesson. God is in control. There's a major turning point in Job's story. It comes in chapter 38. God speaks finally out of this whirlwind. And here is what is so interesting, that up to this point, Job wants answers. Job doesn't know what we know, in chapter 1 about Satan saying, well, God, Job only worships you because he's so blessed. Job doesn't know about all of that, and he wants answers. And finally, God comes and God speaks. But when God does speak, what God does not do, he does not answer all of Job's questions. It's amazing. All that God does, he acts kind of like a prosecuting attorney, and he questions Job basically. Job, do you really know what you're talking about? Do you know what I know? In chapter 38, the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and this is what God said. Who is it that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together with all the angels and shouted for joy. Who shut up the sea behind the doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt? Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? And for 4 chapters, God just continues to press Job and to ask him these hard questions. And finally, Job's reply is in chapter 42. And Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Suffering is a riddle that we can't solve. There are things in life that happen, and they're difficult, very, very difficult to bear. And sometimes, we want to speak to God as if he needs our advice. But the truth is that God is in control, and God is so much beyond us. We can't comprehend sometimes. It's impossible to fathom, why did this happen? Why is this happening? But nevertheless, God is in control, even when it seems like everything around us is falling apart. And the good news is that there is a day coming, a day when justice will be restored, a day when all the brokenness will be healed, a day when people who have victimized the innocent, when they will be held accountable and pay the price. There is a day coming when all the wrongs will be corrected. And I love what Paul has to say about this issue, suffering and injustice and things. Romans chapter 8 is one of those passages. I'm going to read some selected verses. And he has great advice. He said, beginning in verse 18, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. Verse 24 and 25, for in this hope we are saved. But the hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Verse 28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. In verse 31 and 32, what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also along with him graciously give us all things? In verse 38 and 39, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. When it seems like everything is falling apart, when it seems like there is no hope, we need to remember God is still on his throne. And one day we will have victory. One day we will have victory. We will have restoration. We will have healing. And we will have victory over every bit of suffering, over every injustice, every wrong will be righted on that day. God is in control. Here's one more lesson we learn, and it is this, that you can be deflated without being defeated. Job was clearly deflated. The wind was taken out of his sails. He was suffering. He was hurting. He was sick. And he had lost his forward momentum. And he's waging a war now, not only with his body and his pain and his suffering, but he's waging a war even in his own mind and his own spirit. He's struggling. And yet, in spite of this struggle, he's able to hang on somehow to his integrity and to hang on to his hope. Even at times when it seemed like God was his adversary, nevertheless, he kept his faith. And I love this statement he makes in near the middle of the book, definitely the middle before God speaks. In chapter 19, Job says in verse 25, 6 and 7, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. And he said, how my heart yearns within me. I love that confidence. He's suffering and he's struggling, and yet he knows one day I'm going to stand before God. One day I'm going to be restored. And here's the good news, that as long as we have a home in heaven, this world cannot defeat us. We will have times when we are deflated. We will have times when we are struggling and hurting, and it's hard just maybe to even get up and face the day. But we will not be defeated, because this world is not our destination. It's the journey, and we're headed to heaven. We have a place prepared for us. We have a hope that is living and steadfast. We have an inheritance in heaven. Peter says that will never perish, spoil, or fade. And so, guess what? Thank you, Jesus, right? We can stand. We can stand. Sometimes we might lose the battle that we're fighting. Sometimes people are fighting for their marriage and their marriage doesn't survive, or they're fighting for their job or their reputation, or fighting for their health, or maybe even sometimes they're fighting for the respect or the affection of their own children. Sometimes we fight and struggle for financial freedom. And there are so many different things that we struggle with sometimes in life. And maybe right now you are struggling with something. And, I don't know. We never know how those things are going to turn out. But this I do know for sure, that when we have a relationship with Jesus, that those struggles do not have to define us. They do not have to define us. They do not have to own us. And you see, this battle that we have in this life, especially with death, sin and death, the battle has already been won. Jesus already won it. He already suffered for us. He already paid the price for our sin. He suffered and died for all of creation. And He died. Yes, He died. And yet, even though He died, He lives. God raised Him from the dead. And with that victory of the resurrection, we have victory too. We shall live as well. And someday, creation itself will be restored. Jesus has won. He is one. The Apostle Paul, he was no stranger to suffering. If you read those letters of Paul and read in the book of Acts the times that, he was severely beaten and persecuted and all these things. But I love what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And I'm going to just share a few verses. There's more that I could share, but I'm just going to read a few verses, 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 16, 17, 18. He said, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." And then he goes on to explain, verse 16 and following, "Therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day, because, or for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." All these things that we see here on planet Earth, they're temporary. Everything that surrounds us, it's temporary. And even our very lives, they're temporary. But when we focus our vision on those things that cannot be seen, we're talking about eternity. Eternity. And those things will last forever. And we know it's true because, again, Jesus lives. And those promises of God have been validated. Job's story had a happy ending. He regained more than he lost. He got his health back. He got his wealth back. He got the respect of everyone back. He lost all of that. He had 10 more children. He got to see his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren grow up before he died. He lived 140 more years. All of that was good. But the truth is, though, that we know that not every story has a happy ending. And I wish I could stand before you today and just say, oh, yes, just have more faith or everything is going to be fine. But not every story has that happy ending. But guess what? This world is not our home. Because what seems to us like the end may very well just be the beginning. Right? When we say every story doesn't have a happy ending, well, that's not really true if God is the root of your story, right? Because every story has a happy ending when our lives are secure in Jesus Christ. That's why He came. John 3:16, I try to use the verse almost every Sunday, but that's why He came. For God so loved the world. Why? That He gave His only begotten Son, Jesus. Why did He do that? So that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but will have everlasting life. We can have victory over this life. We can have victory over death through Jesus. I think it was last week I talked about, all things being made new under the S-O-N, the Son, Jesus Christ, right? And God says in Revelation 21, behold, I make all things new. That is a game changer. There is victory for suffering. It's found in Jesus. And there is victory over death. It's found in Jesus. The only answer, by the way. The only answer. I realize there are still unanswered questions. There will be until we get to heaven. But he is the answer. I love, and I'm going to close with this, and we're just about ready for decision time. Matthew 11, 28 through 30, and Jesus said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. We might not find every answer, Why is this happening to me? Why did that happen to my loved one? Why am I suffering? We may not find those answers, but we will have companionship. We will find support. We will find friendship. We will find how much he loves us. And you know what? We will find hope, knowing where ultimately our journey ends, in heaven with Jesus Christ.